It was an ordinary morning. The sun had barely begun to rise over Westfield Estates, a neighborhood where everything seemed perfect, except for Daryl Carter, the only black man in the community. As he stepped out to move his car, he heard it. "Hey! You need to move that car right now." Karen, the woman who felt entitled to control everything in the neighborhood. But today, Daryl had a secret, one that would change everything. "I own this street," he said, his voice calm yet filled with power. Karen froze. She didn't believe him. No one did. But Daryl wasn't just talking. He had the paperwork, the right, and now he was about to take back what was always his. Westfield Estates, a place where everyone knew their place. The streets were pristine, the houses pristine, and the neighbors, mostly white, held a sense of superiority. Daryl had spent years here, working his way to success, but the whispers never stopped. The house he owned, the cars he drove, the job he had, were all a testament to his resilience. But to some, he was just the black man who didn't quite belong. Jill Hawthorne, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, was one of those people. She had made it clear over the years that she didn't like how things were changing. And Daryl, he was one of those changes. Daryl was finishing his coffee when Jill, standing on her porch across the street, called out to him. "Hey, Daryl! Move your car. It's blocking the street." Daryl didn't flinch. This wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. He knew the game, and this time he was ready to play. Jill was standing there with a look of authority, her hands on her hips. She wasn't asking, she was telling. And Daryl, for the first time, was about to turn the tables. "You know what, Jill?" Daryl called out, his voice steady, not showing a hint of hesitation. "I own this street now. It's my property. So, if anyone's going to move, it's going to be you." Jill's face went pale. "What? You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious," Daryl said, turning around and calmly walking to his car. "The parking rules. They've changed." Jill stood there dumbfounded. She had lived in this neighborhood for over 20 years, and no one had ever questioned her authority. But Daryl wasn't just any resident. He wasn't some tenant or newcomer. He was someone who had quietly become the owner of what she considered her territory. She fumbled with her phone, her fingers shaking as she tried to find the HOA bylaws. She didn't know how Daryl could have done this. She didn't know how he could have purchased the street, but she knew one thing for sure. He had. "You can't just do this," Jill spat, walking toward him. "You're not some." Daryl interrupted. "I'm not just anything, Jill. I've been here longer than you think. And it's time you understood that." The calmness in his voice cut through her fury like a knife. The power had shifted, and Jill realized too late that she was losing control. Within hours the news spread. The neighbors were in shock. Daryl Carter, the quiet black man who had kept to himself for years, now owned the street. People gathered outside their homes, whispering, looking over at him as if he were some kind of anomaly. Some thought it was a joke. Others felt threatened. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Jill was at the front of the room, her voice cracking with frustration. "We can't let this happen. We can't let him take control like this." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Daryl had done everything by the book. The documents were legal, the purchase was complete, and he had every right to what he had claimed. The only thing Jill could do now was to fight back. Later that evening, Daryl sat in his living room, staring out the window at the rows of houses. He thought about how this neighborhood had always treated him, like an outsider. He had built Innovis from the ground up, one of the most successful tech companies in the city, but still he was treated as if his presence didn't belong here. His phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues congratulating him. But the praise didn't sit well. It wasn't about the victory for him. It was about the constant battle to be accepted, to be seen as more than just the black guy. His best friend Marcus called him. "You did it, man. This is huge. They're not going to know what hit them." Daryl exhaled. "Yeah, but I'm not sure if I should be celebrating, Marcus. I've always had to fight. Always had to prove that I'm good enough. And now I'm just another target." "You've earned this, Daryl," Marcus replied. "But you're right. This isn't just about you anymore. This is bigger than the street. It's about who gets to own what, who gets to control the narrative. And now you do." The HOA's next step was to get the city involved. They threatened Daryl with legal action, saying that what he had done was unfair. They called the police, claiming he was trespassing on public property. Daryl smiled when he heard the news. He knew they would play dirty. But he was ready. He wasn't just going to let them take everything back. The police arrived at his door the next morning, but Daryl didn't flinch. He greeted the officers calmly and handed them the paperwork. "You want to see my ownership records? Here you go." The officers, realizing there was nothing they could do, left quietly. But the tension in the air was palpable. Jill had pushed too far, and now there was no going back. The final battle took place at the town hall meeting. Jill, accompanied by a few loyal neighbors, tried to rally support. But Daryl had allies too. Residents who had been watching quietly for years, and they knew the truth. When Daryl stood up to speak, the room fell silent. "I've been here for years, working, contributing, living like any other person. But every day, I've had to deal with whispers and sideways glances. I've had to prove that I belong here, even when the system was rigged against me." Jill stood, shaking her head. "This isn't about race, Daryl. This is about fairness, about the integrity of our community." Daryl took a deep breath. "No, Jill. This is about power. The same power that people like me have had to fight for tooth and nail, just to get a seat at the table. I'm not just here to take over a street. I'm here to prove that people like me, people who work, who fight, who succeed, deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to have a place in this world." The vote was close. But in the end, Daryl won. He wasn't just the hero of this neighborhood. He was the symbol of resistance, of strength, and of the fight for fairness in a world that had tried to keep him down. As Daryl sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He hadn't just won the street. He had won something more. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Daryl Carter felt like he truly belonged. The victory was sweet, but the consequences came fast. Daryl's ownership of the street wasn't just a win. It was a declaration, a statement to the entire neighborhood, and Jill Hawthorne wasn't about to let it go quietly. As the days passed, Jill began to rally support for a new initiative, a petition to change the zoning laws in the area. She couldn't take Daryl's victory lying down. Behind closed doors, she was talking to the city council members, trying to build an argument to reverse his control over the street. But Daryl wasn't worried. He knew this fight wasn't over yet. That evening, as Daryl sat at his desk working on a new tech contract, his phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "They're making moves. City Council wants to revisit the zoning issue next week. You need to be prepared." Daryl smiled to himself, adjusting his tie as he prepared to meet the challenge head-on. He wasn't just going to let them take everything he had worked for. Not now. The next morning, Daryl walked into the local coffee shop. his usual spot for the last 5 years. He took his seat, ordered his coffee, and opened his laptop, ready to face the day. But as he set his laptop down, a familiar face approached. It was Emily, a neighbor he had always respected, a quiet woman in her 50s who lived 2 blocks over. "Hey, Daryl," she said, sitting down across from him. "I've been meaning to talk to you." Daryl raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind, Emily?" She looked around, making sure no one was listening. "I don't know what Jill is telling people, but I want you to know. Most of us don't think what you did was wrong. Honestly. Some of us are tired of the way she's been running things. She's always had it her way." Daryl stared at her, surprised. "Wait, what do you mean?" Emily leaned in, lowering her voice. "You've got a lot more people in this neighborhood who agree with you than you realize. You just need to keep pushing. We're with you." Daryl was stunned. He had never imagined that Emily, quiet and reserved, would be on his side. But hearing her words gave him hope. Maybe there was a chance he could truly change the power dynamics of this neighborhood, once and for all. The tension was escalating. Jill's petition was gaining traction, and it was becoming clear that this was going to be a full-out fight. Daryl, however, was prepared. He started organizing his supporters, speaking to other residents who had been quietly against the HOA's rules for years. He contacted his lawyer to ensure he was ready for any legal challenge Jill might throw at him. But the most important step came when Daryl decided to hold a community meeting at the local library. It wasn't just about the street anymore, it was about the fight for ownership, freedom, and equal rights for everyone in the neighborhood. He sent out invitations, making sure everyone knew the meeting wasn't just about the parking. It was about the greater power struggle happening in the community, the battle to reclaim what was rightfully his, and what had been stolen from others. The night of the community meeting arrived. The room at the library was packed, residents filling every seat, standing along the walls. Jill and her supporters were there too, trying to dominate the space with their presence. Daryl stood up at the front, his hands steady, his heart calm. He had faced worse challenges than this. He knew how to handle the pressure. "Thank you all for coming," Daryl began. "This isn't just about parking. It's about taking back control. It's about making sure we all have a say in how this neighborhood is run. And it's about fairness." Jill scoffed from the back of the room. "Fairness? This is just about you trying to make a statement." Daryl didn't flinch. "No, Jill. This is about everyone who's been pushed to the sidelines, overlooked, and told they don't belong. This isn't just my fight. This is our fight." The room went silent. Some people looked at each other, nodding. Few even clapped, showing support. It was happening. The shift in power was becoming real. The next week, the city council meeting began. Jill and her allies were ready to argue their case. They had come up with every argument they could think of to challenge Daryl's right to control the street. But Daryl had something they didn't: the truth. When it was his turn to speak, he stood confidently before the council, his voice strong and clear. "I'm not here to take away anyone's rights. I'm here to make sure that everyone has a chance to own what they've worked for. To build something that matters," Daryl began. "For too long, this community has been ruled by a small group of people who think they have the right to control everyone else. But I won't stand by and let that happen anymore." The council members listened, some of them nodding in agreement. Jill, visibly upset, tried to interject, but Daryl kept speaking, focusing on the bigger picture. "This isn't just about one man owning a street. This is about breaking the system that has kept so many people from having a voice. I'm doing what's right, and I'm asking you to stand with me." The vote was cast, and Daryl waited anxiously as the council members deliberated. Jill's supporters argued fervently, but Daryl's words had struck a chord. When the vote was announced, Daryl's heart pounded. The room erupted in applause. Daryl stood there, his fists clenched, knowing that he had won not just a street, but the right to be seen, the right to be heard, and the right to change the rules. Days after the decision, the neighborhood began to change. People who had once been too afraid to speak up now felt empowered. Daryl's victory had shown them that change was possible. Jill, though defeated, didn't give up. She continued her campaign, trying to undermine Daryl at every turn. But Daryl didn't care. The battle for the street was over. Now it was time to make sure that his victory had a lasting impact. As Daryl stood outside, watching the neighborhood slowly transform, he realized something. This wasn't just about winning. It was about the journey. The countless nights spent working, fighting, and struggling to get to this point. The obstacles he had overcome to reach a place where he could finally take control of his future. He had faced the odds, and now he was finally living on his own terms. The days following the council's decision were a whirlwind. News outlets picked up the story, and Daryl found himself at the center of a growing movement. Headlines across the country started to feature him. His battle for property rights was being hailed as a victory for the marginalized, for the silent voices that had spent too long fighting to be heard. But Daryl knew that the real battle was far from over. In the coming weeks, the neighborhood began to change. More residents, some of whom had quietly supported him, began speaking out. They attended meetings, voiced their opinions, and began to push back against the HOA's iron grip. People from all walks of life, from local business owners to stay-at-home parents, stood with Daryl, their voices united. But with each new ally, the opposition grew stronger. Jill continued her fight, trying to rally support among the wealthier residents who had benefited from the HOA's control. She used her connections, working behind the scenes to stir up resentment. Daryl knew he couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. The backlash was inevitable. One afternoon, as Daryl was in his office, reviewing contracts and overseeing new projects at Innovis, he received a call from his lawyer. "Daryl, we need to talk," his lawyer Olivia said, her voice. After the council's decision, everything changed rapidly for Daryl. News outlets picked up the story, and Daryl became part of a much larger movement. His victory was being seen as a win for the marginalized and silent voices. But Daryl knew the real fight wasn't over yet. Within weeks, the neighborhood began to change. More residents, who had once remained silent, started speaking up. They attended meetings, voiced their opinions, and began standing against the HOA's control. From local business owners to stay-at-home parents, everyone was now on Daryl's side. The community was transforming into something united. But as more people joined him, the opposition grew stronger. Jill continued her fight, rallying wealthy residents who benefited from the HOA's control. She used her connections to stir up resentment and spread new forms of hatred. Daryl knew he couldn't let his guard down yet. The battle was far from over. Backlash was inevitable. One day, while Daryl was in his office reviewing Innovis's new contracts, his lawyer called. "Daryl, we need to talk," Olivia said, her voice laced with concern. Daryl set down his pen and picked up the phone. "What's going on?" "This case you're dealing with has some new complications. You need to be prepared. Jill's rallying her supporters again, and she's finding new ways to go after you," Olivia explained. Daryl bit his lip. "So, what do we need to do?" "We're still winning, but they're working behind the scenes to change the rules. You'll need to strengthen your position." Bring your supporters together and make your message stronger, Olivia said. After thinking for a moment, Daryl replied, I'm ready. Daryl called his team together. He spoke with his closest supporters and shared his strategy. He realized that this wasn't just about a street. It was about a larger fight for his voice, his rights, and his place in the community. We've worked too hard to let it go now, Daryl said to his team. Our victory isn't just about one street. It's the beginning of something much bigger. Jill was determined to win back control. She used her connections to city council members, mobilizing her supporters to start a new petition. She pushed for new policies that could reverse Daryl's victory. Meanwhile, Daryl kept his lawyer updated and solidified his support network. He wasn't going to let Jill get away with it. He had to prepare for what was coming. After the community meeting, Daryl began to see a noticeable shift in the support he was receiving. More people were starting to speak out, people who had previously remained quiet. Their faith in Daryl was growing, and they were ready to back him up. Even after Jill's continued efforts, Daryl felt that he was standing alongside his community. This fight wasn't just for a street, it was for his identity and his rights. The final council meeting arrived. Daryl called on his supporters to join him, knowing this was going to be a decisive battle. This wasn't just about the council's decision. It was the culmination of his entire journey. Standing before the council, Daryl's confidence was clear. Jill had thrown everything at him, but her voice was losing its power. This isn't just about parking, Daryl said. This is about all of us carrying the weight of our rights. And this time we're speaking up. After the council's decision, Daryl realized his victory wasn't just for him. It was for every person who had ever quietly fought for their rights, for those who struggled every day to be seen. As Daryl stood by his window, looking out at the neighborhood, he realized how far he had come. This fight wasn't just about external battles. It was about understanding and recognizing his own worth and his right to be part of something bigger than himself. Everyone has the right to write their own story. And when you get the chance to do so, make sure you use your voice. Today, Daryl learned that. And if you choose to raise your voice too, it's time to write your own story your way. The morning after the council's final decision, Daryl sat alone in his living room, looking at the empty street outside his window. For the first time in years, it felt different. Calmer, like the air was finally clearing. He didn't feel like celebrating. Yes, he had won, but the fight had only just begun. Jill's defeat wasn't the end. It was a step in the right direction, but Daryl knew the road ahead was still filled with obstacles. He needed to secure what he had won and make sure that this wasn't a one-time victory. He reached for his phone and dialed Marcus. "You good?" Marcus answered. Daryl smiled faintly. "Yeah, just thinking. It's not over yet. We both know that. But for now, you're the man. Everyone's talking about you. The community's already buzzing and they want change. You just have to keep pushing." Daryl nodded. "I will. But it's about more than just one street now. It's about showing people they don't have to live in fear of a system that's not working for them." 2 days later, Daryl was informed of something he didn't expect. Jill was trying to fight back in another way. This story made you pause. Made you feel something real. Then don't let that feeling stop here. 'Cause stories like this, they aren't just about characters. They're about us. What we believe. What we assume. And what we choose to remember. We didn't share this just to entertain you. We shared this to remind the world of something we keep forgetting. Respect matters. Truth matters. And silence is not weakness. Sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest stories. The ones who've been hurt the most often carry the most strength. They don't need applause. They don't need revenge. They just need someone to finally see them, to see past the labels, to hear the silence behind their eyes, to say, "I believe you. I see you." Because when someone has been overlooked their whole life, that one moment of recognition can feel like justice. And for those who laugh too soon, judge too fast, look down instead of leaning in, let this story be a mirror. The man in cuffs wasn't broken. He was built differently, stronger, quieter, and far more powerful than they ever imagined. And the truth he carried, it didn't need a courtroom. It didn't need permission. Just needed time. Because truth doesn't chase applause. Wait. And when the world is finally quiet enough to listen, speaks. So if this story reached something in you, share it. Not for the views. Not for the likes. But because someone else somewhere needs to feel what you just felt. Maybe they've been misjudged. Maybe they're hiding their truth behind silence. Maybe they're standing on the edge, wondering if anyone will ever look past the surface. Let this video be the hand that reaches them. Let it be the moment they realize they're not alone. Their story still matters. And what's true will always find its way home. We're not just here to tell stories. We're here to rewrite what the world thinks it knows. To honor those who stay silent until it matters most. So if you're still here, thank you. You're the reason we do this. You're the kind of person this world needs more of. Someone who listens. Someone who sees. Now take that heart and carry this forward. Because change doesn't start with noise. It starts with moments like this. Subscribe for more stories that challenge what we assume. That lift the veil on hidden truth. That remind us. One story, one moment of truth, can shift everything. And sometimes, the one they laughed at was the one who held all the power. Oolong. As the screen fades to black, remember this. Silence isn't empty. It's full of the things we never dared to say. And when it finally speaks, the world listens.